I remember the exact moment it stopped feeling like something small and started feeling like something I couldn't ignore anymore. It was early in the morning, one of those quiet, unremarkable mornings where the world outside hadn't fully woken up yet. The light was still soft, the house was still, the kind of morning that belongs entirely to you before the day takes over. I had gone through the same routine I'd followed for years. The kind of morning routine that becomes so automatic, so deeply ingrained that you stop thinking about it. You just do it. Alarm off, feet on the floor, into the bathroom. The same fluorescent light, the same mirror, the same face looking back. I picked up my toothbrush, squeezed the toothpaste, started brushing the way I always had. 2 minutes, circular motions, front and back, the way I'd been told to do it since I was a child. And then I saw it again, that faint trace of red in the foam. Subtle, almost easy to dismiss, as I had done so many mornings before. Just a flash of pink in the white foam, rinsed away in seconds. Nothing to worry about, right? Probably brushed too hard, probably a little dry, probably nothing. But this time something was different. This time it lingered in my mind longer than usual. I stood there at the sink for a moment, looking at my own reflection, and felt something shift. Not panic, not even fear exactly. More like a quiet, unsettling awareness, the kind that settles into the back of your mind and refuses to leave, no matter how many times you try to rationalize it away. Because deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And I think part of me had known for a while. I just hadn't wanted to look too closely. If you're over 40, chances are you've experienced this too. That moment at the sink. The brush pulled back to reveal something you weren't quite expecting. Bleeding gums that seem to appear out of nowhere. Or maybe they've been there for so long that you've stopped registering them as unusual at all. Maybe it happens when you brush. Maybe when you floss. That sharp little sting. That thin red line on the floss that you try not to look at too directly. Maybe even when you bite into something as simple as an apple, or take a sip of something cold, and feel a brief flash of sensitivity that wasn't there 5 years ago, that fleeting discomfort you've learned to work around without fully acknowledging. And like most people, you probably told yourself the same thing I did. It's normal. It's just age. Or, I just need to be more careful when I brush. I should floss more consistently. It'll sort itself out. We rationalize. We minimize. We move on with our day because there are 100 other things demanding our attention right now. Bleeding gums don't feel like an emergency. They don't stop you from going to work or picking up the kids or making dinner. They're just there. A background inconvenience that we quietly absorb into our lives. But here's the question I couldn't stop asking myself once I actually started paying attention. What if it isn't normal? What if "it'll pass on its own" is exactly the kind of thinking that leads to much bigger and much more expensive problems down the road? As I started paying closer attention over the following days and weeks, I realized the bleeding wasn't the only change happening. My gums felt more sensitive than they used to. There was a faint tenderness along the gum line, not constant, but enough to notice. A sensitivity that had slowly crept in so gradually that I couldn't say exactly when it had started, and my teeth, they felt slightly different, not loose, not in any dramatic way that would obviously alarm you, but not as firmly rooted as they had always felt, like something had shifted ever so slightly in the foundation beneath them. It's hard to describe unless you've experienced it yourself. It's not pain exactly. It's more of a constant quiet awareness, a background discomfort that reminds you again and again throughout the day that something isn't quite the way it's supposed to be. And with that physical awareness came something I hadn't expected, a low-grade anxiety that I hadn't anticipated. Because your mouth is not separate from the rest of you. It's part of how you connect with other people, how you smile at someone you love, how you laugh freely and without thinking, how you eat the foods you've always enjoyed without hesitation. When something feels off there, even subtly, it doesn't just affect your physical comfort. It starts to affect your confidence, the ease you move through the world with, the way you present yourself, consciously or not. A smile held back is more than a social gesture withheld. It's a small piece of yourself you're keeping locked away. That's when the questions started, the real ones, the ones that go deeper than maybe I should floss more often. Why was this happening now after decades of feeling fine? Why did it seem to be slowly progressing despite everything I was already doing? What was I actually missing? What piece of the picture had I never been given? And more urgently, how much time did I have before something minor became something permanent? I started looking for answers, and the more I looked, the more unsettling the picture became. Because here's what I discovered, something that most people don't genuinely understand until it's too late. Bleeding gums aren't just about brushing too hard or not flossing enough. In most cases, when you look at the research, They're one of the earliest and most consistent warning signs of gum inflammation, what's clinically known as gingivitis, a process that, when left unaddressed, doesn't stay at the gingivitis stage. It progresses, it advances into periodontal disease. And once that process gains real momentum, once inflammation has had time to work its way into the deeper tissue, into the ligaments, into the bone, the consequences stop being cosmetic. We're talking about persistent bad breath that doesn't respond to any mouthwash or breath mint because it's not originating at the surface. We're talking about gum recession, the slow, often painless withdrawal of tissue away from the base of your teeth, exposing the root surfaces that were designed to stay protected. We're talking about pockets forming between your gums and your teeth, dark, moist spaces where bacteria thrive without any meaningful interference. We're talking about the slow, silent erosion of the bone structure that your teeth depend on to stay where they are, and eventually, in cases where this process has been running unchecked for too long, tooth loss. Not sudden, not dramatic, gradual, quiet, and entirely preventable, if caught early enough. I know that sounds extreme when you're standing at the sink looking at a little pink foam, but this is the actual trajectory for millions of people every single year. Not because they didn't care, not because they were irresponsible with their health, but because they were treating the symptom without understanding the source, because nobody ever gave them the full picture. And here's the part that stopped me completely when I came across it, the part that genuinely changed how I was thinking about all of this. This isn't just about your mouth. There is a growing, substantial, peer-reviewed body of scientific research linking chronic gum inflammation to conditions that have nothing to do with teeth. Not fringe theory, not alternative medicine. Real research published in real journals, carried out by researchers at major institutions around the world, exploring connections that most of us never learned about because nobody told us to look. Researchers have found significant, consistent associations between periodontal disease and cardiovascular health, specifically the type of chronic, low-grade vascular inflammation associated with arterial plaque buildup. Studies have found elevated rates of gum disease among people with blood sugar regulation challenges and evidence pointing to a bidirectional relationship. Gum inflammation appears to make metabolic regulation harder, and metabolic dysregulation appears to worsen gum disease. Each amplifies the other. There's research into the pathways by which oral bacteria, the harmful strains that colonize inflamed gum tissue, can enter the bloodstream and trigger systemic inflammatory responses. Research into connections between oral health markers and cognitive function. Research suggesting that the mouth, far from being an isolated system, is in constant, complex communication with the rest of your body through pathways we're only beginning to map fully. In other words, that small amount of blood you rinse away every morning without giving it much thought, it might be the most important signal your body is sending you right now. I want to pause there for a moment because I think it deserves to fully register. Most of us carry a mental model in which oral health is a separate category, something that lives in its own compartment, managed during twice-yearly dental visits, and addressed with a toothbrush and some floss, distinct from our real health concerns. Distinct from our heart, our metabolism, our immune system, our energy, our sleep. Science is increasingly clear that this separation is not real. Your mouth is not isolated from the rest of your biology. The tissue in your gums is richly vascularized, threaded with blood vessels that connect it directly to your systemic circulation. The bacteria that colonize that tissue, when conditions allow harmful strains to dominate, don't stay in your gum line. The inflammatory signals that fire when your gums are under chronic stress don't stay in your gum line either. Your oral health is a window into your overall health, and when that window starts showing warning signs, it is absolutely worth taking seriously. That realization changed everything about how I was approaching this. Because suddenly, it wasn't just about aesthetics. It wasn't just about keeping my smile intact or avoiding painful and expensive dental procedures, though those things matter enormously, practically speaking. It was about something larger. It was about understanding what my body had been trying to communicate, about control, or more precisely, the creeping fear of losing it. The fear of waking up one day to a problem that had been quietly developing for years, had been sending clear signals the entire time, and that I had chosen, morning after morning, to rationalize away. That fear felt legitimate, not irrational, not excessive, grounded, and I suspect that if you're watching this, you felt some version of it too. The slight hesitation before smiling in photos, the self-consciousness when you laugh too openly, the way you occasionally avoid certain foods, not because you don't enjoy them, but because your mouth has become unpredictable in ways you didn't plan for. The thought that crosses your mind when you see an older relative who's lost teeth, that quiet, uncomfortable wondering, is that trajectory where I'm headed? These thoughts are not weakness. They're your awareness doing its job. Registering a pattern and trying to prompt you to act while acting is still the easy option. The question is what you choose to do with that prompt. And here's where most people make the mistake that I almost made. They respond to the signal by addressing the surface. They reach for another bottle of mouthwash, a different toothpaste that promises sensitivity relief, a firmer brush or a softer one, a whitening strip that produces the temporary visual impression of dental health without actually producing it, more aggressive brushing that can, paradoxically, accelerate gum recession when done incorrectly, a rinse that numbs the discomfort briefly and creates the reassuring sense of having done something productive, temporary fixes, surface-level interventions. Things that might interrupt the bleeding for a few days or weeks, that might reduce the visible symptoms enough to ease the anxiety for a while, but that don't touch what's actually happening beneath the surface. The bleeding pauses. You feel better. You move on. And the underlying process continues quietly in the tissue below the gum line, in the microbial environment your daily routine never quite reaches. This is the cycle that keeps millions of people stuck, not because they're passive or careless, but because they were never given the right framework for actually understanding the problem they're dealing with. And that's where everything started to shift for me. When I found a fundamentally different way of thinking about gum health, I started learning about the internal factors that most people never consider when they're trying to figure out why their gums bleed, why the sensitivity keeps returning, why the improvements are always temporary. Not the external factors, technique, frequency, which products to use, but what's happening inside the body that either supports or actively undermines the health of your gum tissue. Things like the specific nutrient deficiencies that compromise the body's capacity to repair soft tissue, nutrients most people aren't getting at optimal levels and wouldn't think to connect to their oral health, the critical role of collagen synthesis in maintaining the structural integrity of gum tissue, and what the body needs nutritionally to produce collagen consistently and effectively, the function of antioxidants in managing oxidative stress in the gum environment, the cellular level inflammation that contributes to tissue breakdown over time, the way blood circulation in the fine capillaries that feed gum tissue either supports or undermines the healing process, and what affects that circulation in ways we could actually control. And perhaps most importantly, the oral microbiome, the complex dynamic ecosystem of billions of microorganisms that lives in your mouth. That, in a balanced state, is your first and most powerful line of defense against the harmful bacterial strains responsible for gum disease. That, when disrupted by diet, by stress, by certain medications, by the very products many of us use daily, can tip toward a state where harmful bacteria dominate and inflammation becomes chronic. None of this is obscure science. None of it requires a medical degree to understand. But it is information that almost nobody has been given, because our entire cultural approach to dental health has been focused almost exclusively on the mechanical and the surface level. Brush here, floss there, use this rinse. Come back in 6 months. The what? Almost never the why. And meanwhile, what's happening below the surface, in the tissue architecture, in the immune response, in the microbial balance, continues unaddressed. The more I connected these dots, the more the picture clarified. Treating visible bleeding without addressing the internal environment producing it is like mopping up water without finding the leak. You can keep mopping indefinitely, the floor will stay wet, and you'll exhaust yourself doing it. Real change, lasting change, has to address the source. Once I understood that, the approach to actually solving this became much clearer. And here's what I want you to hear plainly. Ignoring the early signals is not a neutral decision. It's not a safe default. It's what leads consistently to the bigger problems, the ones that can't be addressed with a toothbrush and a bottle of rinse, the ones that require procedures, that require real expense. That, in some cases, can't be fully reversed no matter how much you invest afterward. The early signals are a gift. They're your body communicating before the situation becomes harder to turn around. That quiet fear, it's not irrational, it's signal. The concern about smiling freely, the discomfort when eating, the awareness that the trajectory isn't going in the right direction, the sense that you're managing a problem that keeps coming back, rather than actually solving it. These are not signs of anxiety or hypochondria. They are accurate feedback from an intelligent system that is trying persistently to get your attention. The question is, whether you'll act while acting is still the simpler path. And here is the turning point of everything I learned. When you actually understand what's happening, when you see the complete picture, the fear doesn't disappear, but it changes completely in character. It stops being a vague, shapeless dread and becomes something specific, something you can work with, something that points you toward a response rather than leaving you stuck in a loop of temporary fixes and returned anxiety. Because once you understand the real mechanisms, once you see not just what's happening, but why and what the body actually needs to shift direction, you stop reacting and you start building. You stop chasing relief from the symptom and start creating the conditions for genuine recovery. There are natural, evidence-informed approaches to supporting gum health from the inside, approaches that work not by masking what's happening, but by addressing the environment in which it's happening, by giving the body what it needs to do, what it already knows how to do: repair, regenerate, and defend. These approaches don't compete with good brushing and flossing. They work alongside them. They address the layer beneath, the one that mechanical cleaning can't reach. Deixamos no primeiro link na descrição guia prático para você acessar de forma rápida. Clique e veja. Because the truth is, most people have never been given this dimension of oral health. Not by their dentist, not by the products they use, not by anyone. There's a significant gap between what we now understand scientifically about how gum tissue works, what it needs, and how it heals, and what the average person is actually applying in their daily life. That gap is expensive. In the most literal practical sense, dental and periodontal treatment is among the most significant out-of-pocket health expenditures most families face, and most of it is treating problems that were preventable if the right information had been in place earlier. But the cost isn't only financial, it's the confidence you don't fully feel. The discomfort you've quietly adapted to, the foods you've eliminated from your diet, the smiles you've held back without quite admitting to yourself why, the ongoing background worry that lives in the corner of your mind and drains a little energy every single day. As I continued learning and applying what I was finding, something else became clear that I hadn't expected to discover, something beyond the science, beyond the practical strategies. This was about reclaiming something. There is a version of this story where your mouth is something you feel genuinely good about, where you smile without a second thought, where you eat what you enjoy without discomfort or self-consciousness, where you go to the dentist and hear something different from what you've been hearing, where the quiet worry that currently occupies some corner of your attention simply isn't there anymore, not because you've suppressed it, but because you've addressed what was creating it. That version isn't a fantasy. It isn't reserved for people with perfect genetics or perfect habits or unlimited time for elaborate wellness routines. It's the natural result of understanding your body accurately and giving it what it actually needs to function. And it doesn't require extreme measures. It doesn't require abandoning everything you already do. It doesn't require supplements with impossible to follow protocols or habits that only work if you execute them flawlessly every single day without exception. It starts with awareness, with understanding, with closing the gap between what your body needs and what you've been giving it. Interestingly, many of the approaches gaining the most attention right now in oral health research come back to foundational principles. Things we've always known matter, but have never been connected specifically to gum health and the mechanisms behind it. Supporting microcirculation in the tissue that feeds your gums. Maintaining the balance of the oral microbial ecosystem. Ensuring adequate, consistent levels of the specific nutrients that serve as building blocks for soft tissue repair and immune response. Managing the systemic inflammation that feeds the local inflammation in your gum line. None of these principles is complicated. None requires specialized knowledge or expensive practitioners, but all of them require knowing where to look and having the information that most people are simply never given. It's not magic. There's no shortcut that replaces real understanding. It's alignment between what your body needs and what you're consistently providing. And once you experience what changes when that alignment is actually in place, once you feel what genuine recovery in your gum tissue looks and feels like, you understand why it matters so much. If you've been caught in that cycle, constantly treating symptoms, constantly paying for procedures, always managing and never resolving, then you already know exactly what I'm describing. You've invested time, money, and genuine hope into approaches that offered temporary improvement but never closed the loop, never got to the root, never stopped the pattern from returning. There is another way forward. One that's more complete, more intelligent about how your biology actually functions. One that doesn't discard the surface-level care that still matters, but adds to it the layer that's been missing, the layer that makes everything else more effective. This same method is also available in the pinned comment for those who want to avoid high dental expenses and finally understand how to protect their oral health in a smarter way. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about stopping the bleeding, it's about understanding what your body has been communicating, maybe for months, maybe for years, and finally choosing to truly listen, not to respond with a patch, but with genuine understanding, not to suppress the signal, but to address what's generating it, to stop minimizing what you already know is there, to stop rationalizing away the awareness that something needs to change, to stop waiting until the signal becomes impossible to ignore because at that point the options have narrowed, considerably. You already know something is off. That's what brought you here. That quiet background awareness you've been carrying. The sense that what you're doing isn't quite enough, that something deeper is at work, that isn't anxiety. That's intelligence. I wish someone had laid all of this out clearly for me years earlier. Not because I couldn't eventually find my way to it, but because of everything spent in the meantime. The money, the procedures that addressed effects rather than causes, the discomfort I normalized because I thought normalization was the only option, the low-level worry that was always present that I'd learned to live alongside without ever questioning whether I had to. It didn't have to be that way. And it doesn't have to be that way for you, because now that I see the complete picture, I see something I couldn't see from inside the cycle. Not just the problem clearly, but a genuine path forward, a path that actually moves in the right direction. From uncertainty to understanding, from managing symptoms to addressing their causes, from reacting to something happening to you to actively participating in what comes next. From fear to genuine well-founded confidence, that shift is available. It's available to anyone willing to look past the surface and engage with how this actually works. And if this kind of content resonates with you, if you want to keep uncovering insights like this, rooted in real science and practical understanding of the signals your body sends and what they mean, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Because what we covered today is just the beginning. There is a much deeper conversation ahead about how your body communicates with you, about how the small persistent signals, like the one you noticed quietly at the sink, can be the most important data points you'll ever receive about where your health is actually heading, and about how learning to read those signals accurately and respond to them correctly and early changes the entire trajectory. This is just the start of that journey. Every signal your body sends has a reason behind it. The bleeding gums, the sensitivity, the quiet unease you feel when you run your tongue along your gum line, none of that is random. It is your biology communicating, and the people who learn to listen to it early are the ones who avoid the consequences that come from ignoring it too long. Let's keep going. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about stopping the bleeding. It's about understanding what your body has been communicating, maybe for months, maybe for years, and finally choosing to truly listen. Not to respond with a patch, but with genuine understanding. Not to suppress the signal, but to address what's generating it. To stop minimizing what you already know is there. To stop rationalizing away the awareness that something needs to change. To stop waiting until the signal becomes impossible to ignore. Because at that point, the options have narrowed considerably. You already know something is off. That's what brought you here. That quiet background awareness you've been carrying. The sense that what you're doing isn't quite enough. That something deeper is at work. That isn't anxiety, that's intelligence. I wish someone had laid all of this out clearly for me years earlier, not because I couldn't eventually find my way to it, but because of everything spent in the meantime, the money, the procedures that addressed effects rather than causes, the discomfort I normalized because I thought normalization was the only option, the low-level worry that was always present, that I'd learned to live alongside without ever questioning whether I had to. It didn't have to be that way. And it doesn't have to be that way for you, because now that I see the complete picture, I see something I couldn't see from inside the cycle. Not just the problem clearly, but a genuine path forward, a path that actually moves in the right direction, from uncertainty to understanding, from managing symptoms to addressing their causes, from reacting to something happening to you to actively participating in what comes next, from fear to genuine well-founded confidence. That shift is available. It's available to anyone willing to look past the surface and engage with how this actually works. And if this kind of content resonates with you, if you want to keep uncovering insights like this, rooted in real science and practical understanding of the signals your body sends and what they mean, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Because what we covered today is just the beginning. There is a much deeper conversation ahead about how your body communicates with you, about how the small persistent signals, like the one you noticed quietly at the sink, can be the most important data points you'll ever receive about where your health is actually heading, and about how learning to read those signals accurately and respond to them correctly and early changes the entire trajectory. This is just the start of that journey. Every signal your body sends has a reason behind it. The bleeding gums, the sensitivity, the quiet unease you feel when you run your tongue along your gum line, none of that is random. It is your biology communicating. And the people who learn to listen to it early are the ones who avoid the consequences that come from ignoring it too long. Let's keep going.